You know, we talk a lot on this show about police officer mental health and police officer performance. And I wanted to bring in somebody who can talk both the mental health side of things, the tactical side of things, and provide us some updates on some different alternatives to be able to make police officers more resilient, more tactically sound, and just be better cops and better humans so they can not only serve their communities, but they can be people that their families want to see coming home every night after their shift. So I want you to meet Jessica Crowley. Jessica, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Hey,
Great.
so we were cops in the same Chicago suburbs. Tell us a little about your career.
I was hired back in 1994 and was hired by Bartlett Police Department. It's 30 miles west of Chicago and not far from where you were from, and spent 27 years, retired 2 years ago, and was a sergeant for 18 of those years and specialized in the crisis intervention and wellness arena.
So when you look at, almost 3 decades of law enforcement, what differences do you see in the way that we just deal with our own mental health as cops?
There's definitely more awareness now than there used to be. And agencies are developing programs internally with peer support programs, which have been outstanding. They're bringing in social workers. Our agency, we actually had our own police psychologist just for us. And she was contracted, and the guys loved it. She would walk in and be very busy. So I think there's been a great transition over the last 20 years to support law enforcement on the wellness side of things. Definitely. We have a lot more to go, but it's great.
Well, and when you talk about having a police psychologist or a police social worker, and we always had on my agency from the day that I got hired in 1980, we had police social workers. There's this myth in the media that cops don't want any help either for us or for our citizens in the mental health arena. And nothing could be further from the truth, right?
I agree. I agree. As a matter of fact, it is welcomed across both the civilian side for the residents and in the internal side with our personnel.
Now, when you talk about being on the crisis intervention team, I was on ours as well. Again, explain to folks that because you are crisis intervention trained as a police officer, doesn't mean you're going to or able to go out and diagnose people's mental health issues, right? What's the advantage of a CIT trained cop?
Sure. For me, it was career changing. I didn't learn how to truly become a great officer until I went to crisis intervention training about 13 years into my career. And it really enables law enforcement to use different active listening skills, communication techniques, be educated about mental health. I knew nothing about it. It opened my eyes in so many ways. And the bonus is it allows us to connect with resources throughout our counties to be able to provide that to the residents in lieu of potentially making arrests. So oftentimes people who aren't trained in crisis intervention will talk too loud, or they'll invade the space of somebody who's in a crisis. And with crisis intervention, it really gives you a lot of tools to be able to walk in and not escalate a scene, therefore keeping everybody a lot safer. And there are great stories that come out of people using those resources that we give them as far as treatment and addiction.
Yeah, absolutely. So you weren't just a cop, you're an athlete as well, and still are, right?
I am, yes.
And you have taken that love of sports and all your experience as a police officer, and you've created a new pathway for yourself, a new career. Talk about that.
There's so many similarities between law enforcement firefighting, just first responders in general, and athletes. I mean, we're tactical athletes. Everything that we do, athletes do, and vice versa. So performing under pressure, the stress, the motivation, the exhaustion, fatigue. And I became a performance coach in addition to becoming a certified hypnotist, heart math practitioner, and brain spotting practitioner. And I work with athletes and first responders both to go from where they are to where they want to be. And it's really, really pretty cool because they use the resources they have within themselves to get there.
You and I were talking about this off camera, but my husband, Dave Smith, I learned 40 years ago from him that we should be treating cops more like athletes. Talk about some of the similarities that you see as a performance coach.
Oh, the need for the consistency as far as training, making sure you work that into your schedule, the need for adequate sleep, nutrition, and really understanding how your physiology works. I think that's one thing that we can grow in law enforcement is how our body works and why we feel the way we feel. So there are so many. In order to perform at your peak, you need to have all of these things, not just one day, but every day. And it takes a commitment. Athletes commit. They're driven to commit to themselves, to get better, to grow themselves in their sport. And in law enforcement, we need to do the exact same thing.
Now, one of the things, and I want you to explain this to people, because one of the things we're seeing, especially now in law enforcement, is we are seeing a lowering of physical standards to even become a police officer. And the former head of training for the NYPD famously said a few months ago that she wanted to get rid of the 1.5 mile run fitness test, because no cop ever runs 1.5 miles in chasing someone. Explain to people why we need to be cardiovascularly fit and physically fit in general to be a good police officer, even though it's true that we probably don't chase somebody ever for 1.5 miles. And as a patrol officer, as a detective, you spend a lot of time sitting. Explain why fitness is so important.
The ability to handle chronic stress. And our body needs exercise. We talk about circumstances, the New York circumstances, running 1.5 miles. It's not about that. Our wellness, our mental health is so intertwined with the need for physical fitness, physical health to offset the cortisol that we get when we're under stress. And that happens even when our radio goes off. Just the mere radio transmission, our heart rate variable, what our heartbeat looks like, changes. And there's studies, it's for a different day, but that physical fitness allows us to make sure that our head brain, our heart brain, and our gut brain that controls our digestion is all functioning and working together so that we can optimize our health. So we benefit in so many ways from physical fitness. And if you don't start your career like that and get in a good routine, if there are no standards, you will see a massive decline in the mental health and wellness of law enforcement across the country.
In other words, this is something that we should be starting in the academy and then continuing forward for somebody's entire career, right?
It has to be a want. For me, it was an extension of my workday. As you guys went to, I believe, we're on 12s, and every day I would wake up at 3. I'd be at the gym at 4 o'clock. I'd get my workout in. I'd go to work, or I'd do the opposite and leave work and go. So when I changed, I knew it was still at work. I was still working. So that my workout became an extension of my workday because I owed it to myself. I owed it to my family, and I owed it to the people I worked with, and I owed it to the community. So it's super
Yeah.
important because it's difficult to make good decisions when you're not physically fit because of the connections between our emotional and mental health.
Yeah, I mean, when you are exhausted, when you are over caffeinated, when you are stressed out of your mind, you may not make the best decisions. And what we're seeing, what we see in the media now all the time is, police officers are expected to be, near perfect, and and it's difficult to be, to display perfection, if you will, when, like you said, you're on that 12-hour shift. And because, right now, 9 out of every 10 police departments are short staffed. So if you're on an agency that's working 12-hour shifts or 10-hour shifts, there's a real good chance that you're working far more than 40 hours a week, and that you don't have a lot of days off. And that exhaustion can have a lot of problems, not just mentally, but also from a motor programming standpoint, right?
Absolutely. And I think to your point, people who are listening think, well, gosh, how do I do that? If I'm working 12s and I have overtime constantly, we're shorthanded. I need to get home, spend some time with my family, go to sleep. Like what are those options? And there are so many other options to working your heart muscles, working your body in a different way. It doesn't have to be a half an hour at the gym. That was my choice. That was what I enjoyed. It could be taking the stairs instead of an elevator. It could be taking a little bit of a walk. It could be meditating. It could be visualizing. It could be doing breath work, which we don't teach enough as far as the reasons behind how breath work works our heart muscles. So there are so many different ways we can, quote, work out without having to necessarily go to a gym.
Now, police officers, again, I started in 1980, and when I went to the academy, we were told, don't talk about any of the stuff you see at work with anybody, especially your family, except just talk to your coworkers, right? Talk to each other. By the time you went to the police academy, we were starting to talk a little bit more about police officer mental health. And now, as we see, the rises in police suicide and things like that, and the last 3 years of the vilification of law enforcement and how that has negatively impacted our mental health, we're seeing a lot more openness about police officer mental health. We're seeing a lot more police leaders try and address the issue, but cops are still very hesitant very often to get help, to take part in traditional talk therapy. Talk about some of the alternatives.
Sure. There's meditation. There's hypnosis, which people are afraid of. And I'm a cop, I'm a hypnotist. And I'm telling you, it is the greatest, most wonderful feeling in the world to just let your body be in a full state of relaxation. There is really, it's amazing. There's heart math, which is working your heart to make sure that your autonomic nervous system is in balance, which is super important to us, is law enforcement. And there's performance coaching, and there's so many different resources that we can tap into. Even something as simple as improv, going and taking a class in improv and laughing and creating those good chemicals, but yet getting benefits that help us in our job, like having us be even safer, being more accepting of others, having tools that help us without being biased. We go through the bias training. Improv is a one-stop shop. As crazy as that sounds, it's so effective. It's fun. You can do it with a spouse. You can do it with one of your kids. So those are a lot of the different options. And I don't think that we teach people what those options are. We go right to a psychologist or a social worker, which are wonderful, so needed. There's lots of value, but there's a lot of value in a lot of the other resources as well.
Now you're a performance coach. And so when we think about a traditional coach, we're thinking, you're there, yelling at a basketball team to, do this and do that and do this play and that play.
I do that.
Yeah, and you do that.
Too.
So talk about what it's like to be a performance coach for, just normal working adults. Like, tell me what that looks like.
Oh, it's awesome. We are such amazing human beings that have so many tools inside of us that we just don't know how to use, and we don't even know they exist. And I'm not a social worker. I'm not a psychologist. I don't counsel people and tell them what to do. I ask them, what would be the best thing that you could leave here with? And they tell me, and then I give them tools to create those emotions or feelings or goals that they want, so that when they leave feeling differently.
Yeah, I think that is so much less intimidating, really, to anyone, and especially to someone, a police officer, or even a retired police officer who's used to being so in control. That's one of the things that you deal with, right? Because we tend to be real control freaks, right? And I would assume people who are athletes are as well.
Yes. And the more, along with control is perfectionism. So you kind of get both of them in one little area, and that is really difficult for mental health. And the more control we want, the less control we really have, because we're not seeing everything around us. So when I work with law enforcement, we do a lot of different interactive activities to let them feel what being vulnerable is, and that you actually have so much more control when you lean into vulnerability. It's not letting your guard down. It's not being weak. It's allowing your vision, your hearing, your body to see everything that's around you, so you can make better, faster, quicker decisions.
Now, how do you talk a cop into being vulnerable? I think about that and I almost shudder, because I think, well, gosh, what does that look like tactically? What does that look like physically? How do you accomplish that?
I experienced it and went through it and used those tools. I mean, the process isn't always pleasant. It's not always fun. So you take ways to create and make those moments really fun in not game situations, but if I were to ask you to look around the room and pick out everything that was black in your office and you have 30 seconds, then I said, okay, close your eyes and tell me everything that's red. Well, you only see what you're focused on. And when we want control, we only see what we focus on. But if I were to ask you right now to pick out everything that was black in your office, I guarantee you'd see things that are red, that were blue, that were green. Right?
Yeah. Wow.
That little exercise we get to use to say, in what way can we enhance this in your life?
What do you think the most difficult mental health issue is for the American law enforcement officer?
I might stir up some controversy, Betsy, on this one. I really believe it's the inability of us to look inside of ourselves to get what we want from ourselves. We've always been people who look to the outside in order to say, well, the culture's bad, the morale is bad, they're making me frustrated. There are so many things that we can do within ourselves, and we can only control one person, and that's us. Does the environment help? Of course it does. Does some of the internal stress of the organization, where we want to feel valued and have a sense of purpose, play a role 100%? So when we look at a lot of the conflict and frustration in law enforcement, I always tell people the problem is never the problem. There's always something underlying. I knew it was time for me to retire when I was in conflict with the beliefs and values of our administration. I knew. I couldn't change the beliefs and values they had, but they didn't align with what I had. And therefore, that was my frustration in my position. So I knew what I wanted. And I left. I retired by choice. Nothing mad or angry. So really, there's so many ways that we as individuals can say, hey, it's easy to blame everything else and look at the extrinsic components of our emotional state. Let's be real and let's look intrinsically. How do we show up? And one of those is knowing that we are not our job. The job is what we do. So we're not our title. So who are you? Wow, right? Who are you? When you show up every day, who are you? They're like, I'm a cop. Well, no, that's what you do. Like, who are you? I'm a husband. No, that's a title. And so we live to fulfill this title and to fill other people's expectations of what we think we should do and who we should be without knowing who we are and what our values and our sense of purpose are.
I love it. I love it. That is such a great answer. Where can people find out more about you and your coaching and get some of that fantastic advice that you're throwing out there?
Great. I have a website. It's aspirewinningedge.com, ASPIRE winningedge.com. And you can find me on LinkedIn and on Facebook under Jessica Crowley.
That's awesome. Thank you so much for spending time with us today and talking about these issues that affect American law enforcement and affect the society that we are trying to help protect. And if you would like more information about us, visit nationalpolice.org.
Ma'am, put the gun down! Put the gun down!
Last year, law enforcement officers were involved in hundreds of thousands of use of force incidents. A use of force incident is when an officer must use nonverbal tactics to gain control of a dangerous situation.
Put the knife on the ground.
In many cases, officers have no choice but to use force when a suspect doesn't comply with a lawful order.
Use of force is always ugly. No one likes it, especially police officers.
Together, we can help de-escalate these dangerous encounters. Help police officers by complying with their lawful orders. Don't attack, attempt to disarm, or flee from an officer.
Use of force is an officer's last option. Most incidents can be avoided by not resisting arrest.
If you feel you've been wrongfully detained by a police officer, then seek a legal solution after the encounter has been resolved.
Let's keep everyone safe. Comply now and complain later.